great. This conversation is going to look like a conversation about public speaking because it's pretty formalized in that I'm standing up here at the front of the room and you are sitting in audience mode. But this is really about the image that you project. And that can be one-on-one or around the conference room table or standing up to give a presentation. But this is about inspiring confidence in your abilities. There are some people, just in the way that they carry themselves, you immediately have faith that they can get the job done, whatever the job might be. And some people do it with a big, bold, dynamic personality, and some people do it with a very calm, down-to-earth demeanor. But whatever the style, you just believe in them. The fallacy is that those kinds of positive assessments that we make about other people, that they're all very subjective, that they're based on nuanced or indefinable criteria. And I've spent the last 20 years of my life researching how human beings assess other human beings. And the bottom line is that there are ground rules. There are metrics. Certain behaviors lead to very predictable assessments on the part of the listener. So if you can better understand what behaviors lead to what assessments, you can just be more in charge of the image that's coming across on the other side. Are you aware that certain facial expressions are hardwired into us? Not all facial expressions, but certain core facial expressions like fear, joy, anger, grief. And it's why we can read facial expressions across cultures, or why babies can read facial expressions at a very early age. Well, the same thing is true for your body language signals. A significant portion of your body language signals are what we call universal, how human beings assess other human beings. And so I'll give you an example of one. Keeping your head level, so literally being level-headed, is a show of confidence across the globe, wherever you go. Now, whether you should show confidence is a value system, and sometimes that changes from culture to culture. Sometimes in some cultures, being deferential is a far better way to do business. But being level-headed is a show of confidence wherever you go. If I raise my chin just a bit, this is a very high-status position to be in. And if I continue to speak to you with my chin just a little bit high, you are very likely to find me a little condescending, a little arrogant. Can you see that? If I lower my chin just a bit, this is a very low-status position to be in. And if I continue to speak to you with my chin low, you're very likely to find me a little shy or deferential, and especially if I tilt my head. Now, whether or not I personally am aware of the position of my chin, because I could be oblivious to what's happening up here, it is still having an impact on your side. And even on your side, you're not consciously aware of what behavior is sending the message because it just happens so fast in there. So if I had started today with my chin up like this and said, "Hello, everybody. I'm very excited to have this opportunity to talk with you," you would all begin to make an assessment of me really quickly, and your exact adjective would be up to you, but you would all be leaning in the same direction. But it is doubtful that any of you would have identified that it was my chin that was bothering you. I mean, you wouldn't leave afterwards and say, "You know, Cara was okay, but her chin, it was so high." You'd just be stuck with your assessment of me. So that's why it's my job as the speaker to be very aware of the signals that I'm sending out, because they're having an impact whether I am aware of them or not. And have you heard studies about how long it takes for someone to come up with an assessment of you? Under 30 seconds. Seconds, right, so seconds. I recently read the research from Nalini Ambady, and she was highlighted in the book Blank by Malcolm Gladwell, but she is the researcher who coined the term thin slicing, which is our ability to see a pattern in just a very thin slice of information. Well, in one of her research projects, she showed people videotapes of individual strangers. She had them assign adjectives that they would use to describe the person on the screen. And at first, she showed the videotapes for 2 minutes. But then she just cut it back, and she got down to 2 seconds. And she found that the adjectives people would use to describe the stranger on the screen were the same, whether they had the opportunity to see the videotape for 2 minutes or for 2 seconds. Now, that's pretty amazing. Actually, it's amazing on two levels. First of all, it's amazing that it happens so quickly. But more importantly for today's conversation, it's amazing that there's general agreement. When we watch a videotape of a stranger, we will all use about the same adjectives to describe that person. So if that is true, there have got to be ground rules. And so that's really what the credibility code is all about. What are the ground rules? What are these behaviors? How much impact do they have? How much control do you have over them? Now, I've had the pleasure to have worked with Google over the last few years, so I know a good deal about your culture. And in a workshop, early on in the workshop, one of the things that comes up is a conversation about authenticity. Because there's a high value here on being authentic, and I want to acknowledge that. And first of all, and support it. I want you to know I believe that you are first, you're going to be at your best if you're first yourself. And that it's really great if you have some strong speaking skills on your side. So I want you to think about the ground rules that I'm about to lay out, like the rules of punctuation or grammar. As a writer, we don't feel inauthentic in our writing because we're following the rules of punctuation and grammar. And you wouldn't say as a writer, well, if we're all following the exact same rules, how will my unique voice come through? So, well, the truth is, if you aren't following the rules of punctuation or grammar, people aren't likely to pay attention to you. And there are some really talented people who can break the rules, so let's acknowledge that too. And it just makes them more interesting. I give you permission to break the rules too. But break the rule because you know the power of it, and you choose to do it differently, as opposed to just being oblivious to how that behavior might come across. All right, I've broken the conversation up into three sections. First, what I call the basics. And these are those behaviors that you need to do just to get those basic level adjectives where someone might describe you as comfortable, competent, capable, credible. Of course, you want that as your baseline. And then we'll talk about those things you shouldn't do. I call those derailers. So those behaviors that are almost always invisible to us. We don't know that they're going on, but they nonetheless undercut our image. And then I'll talk about the perfect balance between being authoritative on the one side to being approachable on the other. And the best communicators of all know how to do both at the same time. And just to give you a quick preview, I will show you what it's like to lean too heavily in one direction or the other. If you're using a lot of authoritative behaviors, and I just kicked into a few more of them right now, you're very likely to come across as capable, competent, and expert. But if you rely too heavily on these behaviors, you could also come across as unreceptive or inflexible, which isn't going to help you create a relationship with the person on the other side. On the other end of the spectrum, if you're using a lot of approachable behaviors, and I just kicked into a few more of those right now, well, you're very likely to come across as interactive, personable, maybe even dynamic. But if you rely too heavily on these behaviors, you could also come across as a lightweight, nice, but inconsequential. So you need to have a balance between both sides. And if you personally know that you need to bolster one end of the spectrum or the other, I will give very specific behaviors that tend to send those messages. Okay, going back up to the top. The very first thing someone notices about you is the visual picture, so your body language has a big impact on your appearance of credibility and confidence. The three pillars that hold up your appearance of leadership presence, of credibility, of personal presence are strong posture, strong voice, strong eye contact. If you're doing those three things, you are going to look good. Strong posture, strong voice, and strong eye contact. Now, most people have heard some version of this advice before. It's not like it's a brand new concept out there. But most people severely underestimate just how important those behaviors are. So let me be explicit. Strong posture means that if you're standing up, your weight is balanced equally over both feet. And whether you're seated or standing, your spine and your shoulders form a T, like a metal T-bar. And this area right here is rock solid, has literal core strength. So notice how if I allow myself to have just a little more wishy-washiness in my spine, I lose a lot of my executive presence. So you have literal core strength through here. Then your head and your shoulders move independently. So your head moves like a camera on a tripod, which means I can look over here, and I can look over here, and I can look over here. What's not happening is this. Again, I'm back to wishy-washy, or being a little kid in trouble. Oh, think about how eagles and owls survey their surroundings. We call them regal and wise. And then one more, your nose has to point directly toward the person you're speaking to. So if I'm looking at you, my nose points directly toward you. And if I look at you, my nose points directly toward you. Notice what happens when my eyes move a little more independently of my nose. I'm very likely to look uncomfortable. But I could also look sneaky, or mischievous, or judgmental, or skeptical. Have you heard the phrase, looking out the corner of your eye at someone? What does that mean? Reticent, questioning. So if you want to come across as straightforward, you have to literally be straight on with the person you are speaking to. There's a concept in communication that is called marked and unmarked communication. And ultimately, what we're trying to do with our body language signals is unmark the communication so that the power of our words will take precedent. Sometimes we're sending some accidental signal that sends a mixed message. And so let me give you an example of how this played out recently. I was working with a group of teenagers, actually a group of young mothers in a job placement program. And one of the young women said to me, "Parents and teachers say that I show attitude. And I don't get what they mean by that, because I really don't feel like I show attitude." But she said it to me like this: "Parents and teachers say that I show attitude. And I don't get," you need to straighten that out. So if I look at you this way, this is unmarked, straightforward communication, me just talking to you. And as soon as I start to move my chin around, it marks the communication. So if you want to unmark the communication so people will really hear what you have to say, you need to be literally straight on, direct. So here's the takeaway in this particular section. If you want someone to describe you as having a strong spine and a level head, you need to literally have a strong spine and a level head. And if you want someone to describe you as straightforward and direct, you have to literally be straightforward and direct. It is pretty amazing how the language we use is a literal translation of the attribute we are describing. So, standing with your weight balanced over both feet, how might you describe me? Grounded, balanced, on solid footing, upright, strong spine, firm backbone, level-headed, head square on my shoulders, standing on my own 2 feet, not easily pushed over. There are so many positive metaphors here, fully evolved. So you want to make sure, oh, and let's take some negative metaphors. Being a slouch, or shifty, or unbalanced, or crooked. So you want to physically embody the metaphors you want people to use when describing you. All right, now if you just learned in this conversation that you should stand stock still, well, that would be a problem too, because part of leadership presence, of looking perfectly comfortable, is fluidity, owning the space around you. So your core provides the solidity, and your hands and your facial gestures provide the fluidity, the interactivity. Hand gestures are, or they're hardwired into all of us. They're a form of communication that's deeper and older than verbal communication. That even blind people gesture when they speak. It's not something we learn visually, it's hardwired. But what is most interesting about hand gestures is that they are an unconscious communication process, which means when you are not thinking about it, your hands are very much engaged in the conversation. And as soon as you become self-conscious, as soon as you begin to think about the hands, you have no idea what to do with these appendages at the ends of your arms. And when that happens, we tend to go into some sort of lockdown mode, or I call it masked mode. And it's that apparent self-consciousness that gives away the fact that you are intimidated or nervous by the situation. When we are perfectly comfortable, our hands talk when we talk. If you want to exhibit executive presence, personal presence, the second your mouth begins moving, your body language has to talk too. Because what intimidation looks like is your mouth is moving, but no other body language signal is online yet. You don't have to learn how to hand gesture. You gesture hundreds upon hundreds of times throughout the day. It's not a skill you need to learn. What you need to learn is not to mask, not to allow yourself to go into these lockdown positions when you are in fact intimidated or nervous by the situation. And the way to counteract that is to reach out. Literally, another literal metaphor, reach out, hand them information. And this, by the way, this gesture where I reach out and hand you information is the most common hand gesture we use when we are talking. Hands reaching out. And you can do it when you welcome people. I could say, hello, everybody. Thank you very much for being here. I'm excited to have this chance to talk to you about this project. So you can do it as a welcome, but you can also do it when delivering facts and figures. I could say, the towers of the Golden Gate Bridge are 746 feet above the waterline. So it doesn't matter what you're talking about, hand them the information. Since hand gesturing is unconscious, you might have to get over a learning curve where thinking about reaching out is a little weird at first. You have to do it enough times that your brain stops having a conversation about it. And usually that happens about 20 times practicing anything. So everybody do this for me for a second. Put your hands like this. And just note what thumb is on top. And now switch. Yeah, feel a little weird? Exactly. But there's nothing more natural than this or this. It's just one is habitual and one is not. Now, if every single day for about 20 seconds for the next 20 days, you did this with the other thumb on top, by that time you might begin to think, which one did I like better? I've forgotten. So, and just keep doing the behavior. Pretty soon your brain doesn't have to have a conversation about it, doesn't feel unnatural anymore. And that would be true about opening up your body language signals on purpose. But let's practice. I know we have some people in remote audiences, so I want you to practice too. I want everybody to stand up. Stand with your weight balanced equally over both feet. And where your feet should be depends on your gender. This is not a societal issue. This is about balance point. Because for women, our center of gravity tends to be, not always, but tends to be in our hips. So the most balanced place for your feet would be directly underneath those hip joints, directly underneath those joints. And for men, because your center of gravity tends to be in your shoulders, the most balanced place for your feet would be directly underneath your shoulder joints, which is a little wide for me, and I don't know if you can see my feet, but this is another example of marked and unmarked communication. This is not a natural position for my feet. So if I stood like this, it would look like I'm trying to tell you something with my body language, a little extra message coming on. So this is the much more natural position for my feet. And for men, the same thing would happen. If you stand with your feet a little too close together, it marks it in the other direction, certainly, but it would look a little unnatural. So just so you know, in all of my research about body language signals, I filter for what does natural look like? So basically, we could do it on purpose, even if we're not feeling natural or comfortable. At least I am firmly in the school of fake it till you make it. But one reason that's true is that when you begin to embody these skills, you really do begin to feel internal, authentic confidence. So I support that. All right, so you're standing with your weight balanced over both feet. Hands by your sides. Most people feel a little uncomfortable with their hands by their sides, but this is a natural position, believe it or not. So make sure your head can move independently on your head like a camera on a tripod. Now, some people tell me that they feel stiff. Are you feeling a little stiff? So let me show you what stiff looks like. So your head and your shoulders moving together, that's what stiff looks like. And your head moving independently on your shoulders, that's what loose looks like. And if you were sitting on a park bench somewhere, your head would be moving, looking around, your head would be moving independently. You wouldn't be turning as you looked around. All right, so now pick up your arms like you're holding the biggest ball you could possibly hold, but your fingers are touching. Huge ball, but your fingers are touching. Where your fingers are touching, put that in front of your belly button. Draw that circle in your mind. Really see that circle in your mind. And then drop your arms. This is your personal space. So now show me with your hands this way that you are perfectly comfortable moving in this bubble of space in front of you. If you reach past this space, okay, that's weird. But this space belongs to you. This is your personal territory. And try to avoid the T-Rex version of this. That's not it either. Okay, so if you want to prove that you're perfectly comfortable, whether you're seated or standing, the second your mouth begins moving, allow your body language to say, hey, I'm comfortable here in this space in front of me. You may now have a seat. All right, so there we have strong posture. And when I say posture, I really mean posture, gesture. They go together like two sides of the same coin. They really have to happen together. But now strong voice. There's a big difference between being technically understandable and really reaching people. And I want to hit this point pretty hard because this is where most people have an opportunity for growth. In a workshop, if I can have the opportunity to give someone individualized feedback, I use a metric from 1 to 5 that goes from just being okay to truly being exceptional to evaluate that skill. So for volume, let me give you my scale from 1 to 5 so you can hear what this might sound like. 1 on the scale with volume, 1, you wouldn't be able to hear me, so I'm actually not going to demonstrate that, but you get the idea. 1, couldn't hear me. 2 is a bit like this, which means you have to work pretty hard at hearing me. Now you can't hear me. Actually, the microphone's not helping, but there we go. You can't hear me, it's just that you're doing all the work. So this is level 2, below average. Level 3 is about like this. Level 3 is average, and most people, by the way, speak at average volume. It's okay, it's adequate. And if you like being described as adequate, no, this is it. It's okay. Level 4 is hopefully where I've been speaking all along. Now with this volume, I'm coming all the way to you. I don't expect you to do the work in this communication. So 4 means optimal. Optimal for that situation. It's always a sliding scale. Depends on the size of the room, the acoustics, the background noise, the situation itself. Level 5 is that one step too far. Where if at level 4, I was really making a connection with you, at level 5, you begin to put up boundaries. It's a really big drop from 4, getting you the perfect connection, to 5, getting you the opposite of what you want. People put up barriers. Most people intuitively know this, that if you come on too strong, people will put up barriers. So they gravitate to the safety of the average zone. And that is the most common mistake I see anywhere I go. People who are willing to be average. And most people would consider it an insult to be described as average. And yet that's the safety zone. Unless you have gotten feedback in the past that you really are too loud at work on a regular basis, it doesn't count at home. Because the thing is, the more comfortable we are, the louder we get. So it doesn't count if you get feedback at home that you're too loud. But if you get feedback on a regular basis that you're too loud at work or too much or too big or something along that line, okay, pay attention to that. But if that does not come your way on a regular basis, you have room to expand. You can just bump it up a notch and you will be more effective. The payoff is huge. The stronger your volume, the more confident, the more comfortable, the more authoritative you come across. For articulation, and that's the clarity with which you pronounce your consonants, the more clearly you enunciate, the more intelligent you come across, the more attentive to details. So for example, if I'm using this especially clean articulation, it's going to be very hard for you not to get the impression that I'm attentive to details, because my articulation is attentive to details. But if I'm using this level of articulation right this very second, I know you can understand what I'm saying, but I doubt that I sound as intelligent as I did just a second ago. So it's not about being technically understood. It's helping them to get the right impression of you. And the more clearly you enunciate, the more intelligent you will sound. For pacing, that is your words per minute, in general, the more slowly you speak, the more comfortable, the more confident, and the more authoritative. And this makes sense. If I'm speaking slowly, I indicate that I have the authority to take up your time. But also, we tend to associate nervousness and pace. And so if you just speak quickly purely as a matter of habit, you are likely to come across as less comfortable because of it. Expression, the more expression you bring to the conversation, the more personable, the more dynamic, the more engaging you will come across. And then the last one on my list is resonance. Resonance is your vocal quality. It's the tone, the timbre, the texture of your voice. And on this pie chart that is your vocal image, it takes up the most space. It takes up a lot of space on that list. So let me bump up the level of resonance in my voice at the moment so you know what I'm talking about. Right now, when I'm speaking to you, there's a lot more rumble to my voice than there was a moment ago. Now, if I began this conversation with this level of resonance in my voice, you would be thinking to yourself, why is she talking like that? Because I get it, it's too much, but you get the idea of what resonance is. I can do a lot of things wrong. But if I have resonance in my voice, I'm going to sound like a force to be reckoned with. So for example, if I'm using this level of resonance in my voice, but I'm giving you some classic signals that I'm very uncomfortable up here because I'm crossing my legs and playing with my fingernails and darting my eyes. Even though my body language signals are screaming that I'm uncomfortable, my voice is compensating heavily in the other direction. And so it would be hard to get the impression that I lacked a certain personal power. But this can work against you as well. I can give you lots of physical signals that I'm in charge. Balanced weight, fluid gestures, direct eye contact. But if I pull back on my speaking voice, and now I have this little teeny speaking voice, even though my body language signals are nice and strong, I'm not going to look like I have a lot of personal power. The quality of your voice lays such a strong platform for how seriously someone's going to take you. And the quick fix for bringing out more resonance, more texture to your voice, speak up. Speak at optimal volume. That is the easiest way to get there. Now, the deeper dive, the technical thing that's happening is you need to get your diaphragm engaged. So right now, my diaphragm is working overtime, and right now, my diaphragm's not working at all. So that's the technical thing that's happening. So let's do a couple of exercises for that so you can experience what it's like to engage this area. To shortcut, I'm calling this the diaphragm, but please recognize there are lots of muscles working in concert. You have the diaphragm, you have the abdominal muscles, the intercostal muscles, but I'm just going to shortcut and say diaphragm. We want to get this engaged. So in order to feel this area engage, I want all of you to say shh really loud. Here we go. Shh. No, twice as loud. Here we go. Shh. Great. So did you feel this tuck under there? I could see it happening, so that's great. Excellent. So that's your diaphragm being engaged. If you know anything about exercise physiology, you know that to build any muscle group, you have to put it under a little bit of strain, and then it'll get stronger. So we're going to put this area under a little bit of strain. I want you to say the days of the week all in one breath. And I want you to elongate the vowels so that you can't take a rest in between each sound. It's not going to sound normal. It might sound something like this. Monday, Tuesday. So that's what we're going to do. Days of the week, all in one breath, nice and loud. Here we go. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Now, you really should have felt that toward the end. Now, if you didn't feel it, you probably took a catch breath. So try to avoid doing that. If you really didn't take a catch breath and you still didn't feel it, you weren't talking loud enough. Because I have a really strong diaphragm. I can feel this anytime I want to just by getting louder. So you can get louder, but you could also make it longer. You could do the months of the year or count from 1 to 30. You definitely can make this exercise work. Most people do not like that feeling of the diaphragm being so connected. And so we end up with this kind of pattern. The beginning of the sentence is nice and strong because there's plenty of air, but as soon as the diaphragm begins to squeeze, the person just relaxes the diaphragm and keeps talking anyway to the end of their sentence. Next sentence, plenty of air at the beginning of the sentence, but then they just relax that diaphragm, sometimes trail off down here for a very long time before they reach the end of that sentence. So you have to either breathe more often, which is fine, or develop more stamina. So basically stick the landing. Make sure you always speak to the ends of your sentences. The diaphragm is responsible for volume. Most people grip in their larynx when they increase their volume, but this area right here plays very, very little role in volume. All of your effort should come from this down here. So to practice this, we're going to count from 1 to 5. And I want you to get incrementally louder. So when you say 1, it's as if you are speaking to someone 2 feet in front of you. And by the time you say 5, you are talking to someone 30 feet away. I will demonstrate first. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All right, so here I got incrementally louder. All right, let's try that again. I should hear a huge difference between 1 and 5. Here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All right, pretty good. So I heard an increase in volume for sure. I also heard an increase in pitch. Now, when your pitch goes up with your volume, that's what yelling sounds like. So right this very second when I'm talking to you, my volume is not hurting your ears, but my pitch would drive you crazy because I'm yelling at you. So when you say 5, you can't say 5. You have to say 5. All right, so let's try that again. This time, don't let your pitch go up as you're speaking. Nice and easy on 1. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Exactly, that's where your voice lives. 5. Right there. That's where the power is. That's where the resonance is. Try to keep this area very relaxed. All right, so there we have voice. Eye contact. In human communication, eye contact is vital. In Western business, eye contact may be the #1 indicator of trustworthiness. Have you heard the phrase, "Can you look me in the eye and say that?" So to Westerners especially, it's not just making eye contact, it's holding eye contact. It's the duration of the eye contact. And across the globe, there's a wide range of what is appropriate from culture to culture. So you should be very sensitive to the areas you find yourself in. But in the Western world especially, 3 to 5 seconds per person is comfortable. So let me give you my scale from 1 to 5. You can see what this looks like. 1 on the scale, I'm not looking at anybody. I'm sure you've seen plenty of speakers where he or she just simply doesn't look at the people he or she's talking to. So this is off the scale in the wrong direction. This would be a 1. Level 2 eye contact is a scanning sort of eye contact. And in some schools of thought, this would be considered good because my eyes are up instead of on the floor. But in my book, this isn't good enough. My eyes, I'm not really seeing you out there. My eyes just happen to be glancing across yours. So this is level 2, below average. Level 3 eye contact is about a second or so per person, and so what I'm doing now is fine. There is nothing wrong with this level of eye contact. It's just that I'm missing so many opportunities with this level. Level 4 eye contact, hopefully I've been doing all along. I really see you over there. You know that I see you. We are having a conversation for a moment. So this is so much more organic, so much more connected, so much more like one-on-one communication. And I know you can't count in your head because, of course, your brain is busy. But the technique is to look at someone until you get to the comma or the pause in the phrase. And then you turn and look at somebody else until you get to the comma or pause in that phrase. And then you look at somebody else. So you're using your sentence structure as a way of moving from person to person. That also keeps it very organic. There are so many great reasons to make strong eye contact. One, there is research that shows the person of highest rank or position in the conversation holds eye contact longer when they are speaking and shorter when they're listening. And the opposite is true of someone who has a lower rank or status in the conversation. They hold eye contact longer when listening and shorter when they personally are speaking. Now, I think it's a good idea to hold eye contact both when you are listening and when you are speaking. But don't accidentally lower your status, because as a listener, you've been making great eye contact. And as soon as your mouth begins to move, you cannot keep the connection. So you need to at least balance that out so that you can have both sides of the equation. Especially because I work with a lot of people who are very technically minded. Sometimes someone will say to me, Cara, I just don't feel comfortable making eye contact. It makes me uncomfortable. And I get that. I completely get it in that it's just happened. It's such a common issue that I definitely understand. But I put it in the category of someone who might say to me, I just don't feel comfortable with computers. I mean, I've tried. I'm uncomfortable with technology. That's true. Extremely common out there that people are uncomfortable with that. It's just that in both cases, you might have to just get past that learning curve. Because if you don't, it might hold you back from reaching your full potential in the business world. All right, one way you can practice your eye contact, and this really, really works. Take some Post-it notes. Put them up on the walls around you or the chairs in front of you. Talk about something, maybe some information you have to deliver, and look at this Post-it note, when you get to the comma or pause in that phrase. Look at this Post-it note. When you get to the comma or pause in that phrase, look at this Post-it note. Because part of learning eye contact is just learning the rhythm and the choreography of what it's like to keep your eyes focused and think at the same time. And so while, of course, we want the human connection, that is absolutely a vital part of eye contact, really seeing people on the other side, at least early on, there's truly a skill set of being able to think and keep your eyes up at the same time. And that's one way to practice that. All right, so there we have it. Strong posture, strong voice, and strong eye contact. So far, everything I've been talking about, these are things you should do. And you really should. You're going to look great if you do these things. But now let's take a look at some things you shouldn't do. Things that can undercut your image. The number one derailer out there, filler words. Kind of, sort of, actually, basically, I mean, right, okay. Of course, uhs and ums. This behavior is often invisible to the speaker. And quite often invisible to the listener until the listener notices, and then it's like a big red flag that goes off. Have you ever had that happen to you, where you catch on to someone's filler and you start keeping a little tally? So I had a woman in one of my workshops recently, and there were 8 people in that workshop. In her introduction, which lasted about a minute, she introduced herself. She said, 15 times. When I was giving her feedback, I said, are you aware that you said a lot? And she wasn't aware she'd even said it one time. What was most interesting is I turned to the rest of the group. And as I said, 8 people in the room. I said, did any of you notice? Only 2 out of 8 had noticed. So it was invisible to her, and it was also invisible to most of them. This is what we call selective attention. And thank goodness for selective attention, or we wouldn't be able to have a conversation with a friend in a crowded restaurant. We are really good at tuning into just the stream of information we want and ignoring everything else. So this is a talent that we all carry around with us. So it's true that most of us have selective attention. We are trying to listen to the message that somebody else is saying, and we're not noticing the filler words. But once someone catches on to your filler words, game over. That's all they can pay attention to for a period of time. And even if they're not noticing the actual fillers, what they are noticing is a quality of not being concise or focused or as direct as you might want to come across. So you just don't want to give them the ammunition out there. The solution for eliminating the fillers is to pause. Leave that white space there, just that empty pause there. And that is absolutely easier said than done, because most people develop the problem because they're uncomfortable pausing. So you have to go back and learn that particular skill. I have a game that we do in class, and we don't have time today for us to do this right now, but I'll teach it to you, and then I hope sometime today you will do it with someone else. So you sit across from a partner, and each of you will talk for 90 seconds on a topic, and it might be something like places in the world you'd like to visit. So something you can easily talk about for 90 seconds. And your goal is to eliminate the uhs and ums from the conversation while you're talking. So you have your own turn for 90 seconds. The listener flags like this. Any or he or she hears. Hand up, and hand back down again, so that you can catch them in the moment. As the listener, if you're playing this game, as the listener, I would never give you this advice in any other situation, but don't really listen to them. Just listen for uhs and ums, because you've been trained your entire life to ignore them, and now I want you to catch them, and it's actually quite hard to catch them because you do get caught up in what they have to say. So just like a social scientist, pay attention to the words that are coming out of their mouths and see if you can catch those filler words. And to help you out with this, so I want you to play that game with someone, so 90 seconds each on the topic, flag like this. You might be amazed how difficult it is to pull them out even when you are thinking about it. With everything I've talked about today, there is a learning curve, and some are longer or shorter than others, but of everything I've talked about, eliminating the fillers is the longest learning curve. It takes the longest time to get them out of your style. But if you were to play this game, this flag game, for 3 minutes a day for 20 days, the problem would be gone. Absolutely gone. And most people don't follow through and play the game for 20 times, but if you were to play it for 20 times over the next 20 days, the problem would be gone. The reason why you only have to focus for 3 minutes on the skill and it'll be gone is that the rest of the day, your brain won't be able to stop thinking about it. And so you only have to force yourself to do the 3 minutes, and the problem will in fact be gone. So I have a tool that I'd like to give you, and that's called my flag game checklist. And it's 20 impromptu questions, so you can play this game. It's got little check marks next to it, so you have to check it off and prove to yourself that you actually followed through with this particular exercise. And I'm going to post it on my website for you. I didn't know exactly what I was going to cover today. This was going to be a little bit fluid. But I did set up a page, so if I ever mentioned a resource, I could post it there for you. And that is Speech Skills. That's my company, speechskills.com/Google Talks. So if you want this checklist, you can get it free. Just go to that page, and you can download the checklist. And I can guarantee you, if you play for 20 days, the problem will be gone. So those are the fillers. The next derailer that I want to talk about is this misplaced upward inflection. So a downward inflection is when your pitch cascades downward at the ends of your phrases and sentences. The upward inflection, it can be as bad as this Valley Girl type thing, where I have a question mark at the end of my sentence. It doesn't have to be this bad, but if my voice just keeps going up into these upper tones and I don't come back down into my lower tones, I'm not going to sound as committed or as mature as I might want to come across. So the downward inflection when speaking in English is the traditional, or rather unmarked, dialect of English where we start high and we end low. It's the function of a statement. The upward inflection is the function of a question, and it starts low and ends high. So let me just demonstrate. The downward inflection starts high. The other day, I went to the Golden Gate Bridge, and while I was there, I watched the sailboats in the water. So that's just classic unmarked dialect in English. The upward inflection does the exact opposite, starts low, ends high. The other day, I went to the Golden Gate Bridge, and while I was there, I watched the sailboats in the water. So if you want to change the behavior, you can't just change the end of the sentence. You have to change the beginning of the sentence. You need to start high and end low. My daughter, when she was in high school, she and all of her friends spoke in near constant upward inflections. And so did her teachers, by the way, when I would go to parent-teacher conferences. This is the arena she lived in every single day. Well, I didn't want to ostracize her from her peer group, and it was fine when she was speaking with her peers to have that particular style, no problem. But every now and then when she would be talking to me, I would say, can you just turn that around for me? Can you just put that in a downward function? And so, of course, she'd roll her eyes, but then she would do it. But pretty soon, she became very much like being multilingual. She could use upward inflections or downward inflections. They were easy for her to adjust. Well, this gives her a significant advantage over her peer group. Because when she goes for a job interview, and the person in front of her being interviewed is saying something like, I honestly believe that I can be the go-to person for this position, and if you just give me the chance, I know that I can get the job done. My daughter will be saying, I honestly believe that I can be the go-to person for this position, and if you just give me the chance, I know I can get the job done. And the interviewer won't know why she sounds more committed, more mature, more intelligent than the person he just interviewed, but she will. So she has this advantage. And you can also have this advantage. The downward inflection is never a penalty. It's an unmarked version of speaking in English. And there can, in fact, be a penalty for using the upward inflection. So I'm just encouraging you to gain control over that. In your particular demographic, that upward inflection is very, very common. All right, so those are the derailers. There are a lot of derailers, but those are the two most common. So now this balance between authority and approachability, the great news is I have covered all of this information. I'm just going to put it into a slightly different context for you. If you'd like to appear more authoritative, take up space. Maintain direct eye contact. Keep your head level. Try to be still. Use strong volume and resonance and downward inflections. That would bolster up the authoritative side. If you'd like to come across as more approachable, what can you do? Well, you can take up less space, but let me just put a caution on this one. The reason this one makes my list, taking up less space, is that there are some people who come on too strong. And the very first thing they need to do to be more approachable is to take up a little less space. Unless you get that feedback on a regular basis, that's not the best place to find approachability. Better places to find approachability: fluid interactive gestures, fluid interactive facial gestures, lots of expression in your voice, and then ability to elicit a response, to engage with the person on the other side. Now, I'm trying to do both of those lists at the same time. With the exception of taking up more or less space, which I can fluidly move between, I am trying to do both of those lists. I'm hoping you would find it difficult to decide if I am more authoritative or more approachable on this topic. But depending on the situation, I can absolutely lean one direction or the other, depending on what's needed in the communication. The problem exists when you're trying for one attribute, but you're using a negative behavior to get there. So these are not the only ways to create authority and approachability. You could create authority by having a poker face, being monotone, emphatic gestures. But those are pretty negative behaviors, and they would completely undercut your approachability, so I don't recommend them. You can create more approachability by bobbing your head a lot when you speak, have excessive smiling, and use that upward inflection. But that would undercut your authority, so I don't recommend that either. The behaviors on these two lists are actually safe. You build that behavior, you're not likely to get any kind of pushback because of it. They are positive ways to develop authority and approachability. All right, if you are thinking in your head, I do not know how I'm going to think about all of these things and talk at the same time. That, of course, I get that. There is no way you can think about all of these things and talk at the same time. It is conceivable. You can think about one of these behaviors and talk at the same time. That's how you practice, as a matter of fact. All of these behaviors have to be in your muscle memory, in your habits, your subroutines. Subroutines are all those channels of communication that are happening simultaneously. There is no way you can think about them all actively, but they are happening simultaneously. And in every category of behavior that I've talked about here, you already have these subroutines. These behaviors are already in your subroutines. It's just that you may not have the best behavior in your subroutine. So you might have to go back and rewrite that, practice a little bit, develop that new subroutine. Once you develop a subroutine, it is effortless to perform that skill. It takes no brain space whatsoever. Well, it's kind of like riding a bike. Do you find it difficult to ride a bike? Depends on whether you ever learned, because once you've learned to ride a bike, once that's a competent subroutine, it takes hardly any effort at all to do it. Now, learning to ride a bike, that is a whole different thing. That is actually difficult. It takes a lot of mental energy, as a matter of fact, mental attention to learn to ride a bike. But once you know how to ride a bike, you could ride a bike and write a poem at the same time, or do a complicated math problem, or have a conversation with the person next to you. So you could do a lot of upper-level mental processing and still be able to ride a bike. But if you were trying to learn to ride a bike, you wouldn't be able to do any of those things. And so that's what it's like to develop these skills. You have to put in the practice time so that you can develop that subroutine. Once you develop the subroutine, actually, it is effortless. and it doesn't take any mental energy. You own the behavior. There are 3 reasons people don't typically take on these skills. And one is that there's a belief that these skills are actually talents. Some people have more talent in this area than others. And hopefully I've dispelled some of those myths today, that these are actually behaviors, and any one of these behaviors you can do. If you discover that your chin is low like this, that does not take talent to get your head level. And so, does it take talent to ride a bike? No, it takes practice. And certainly some people are going to learn quicker than others, so that's where the talent component might come in. But once you learn, it's the same skill. It doesn't matter who learned first. You still have the same skill. So hopefully you'll see these as talents. Now, sometimes people don't know what to practice, and hopefully I've helped with some of that today too, and you'll find more information in the Credibility Code, the book itself, or in my online course. So today's conversation, I have tried to be concise. I called this the Credibility Code in a nutshell. But we can take a much more comprehensive look at this information if you're interested. And if you go, by the way, to my speech skills / Google Talks page, you can get some information about my online course. And in that course, my intention is to be comprehensive, to really thoroughly answer this question, complete with how do you self-assess, and skill drills and practice ideas so that you can truly learn to embody these particular behaviors. But the second reason people don't tend to master these skills is that, and this is a tough pill to swallow, but we are blind to our own inefficiencies. And that it makes perfect sense. If we are being ineffective, it is almost certainly unintentional because nobody is ineffective on purpose. And so we are either blind to the behavior that is going on, or we are blind to the impact that behavior may be having. And we're back to subroutines. Once something becomes a subroutine, it takes no mental energy whatsoever, so we don't even know we're doing it. I'd have to say the number one thing I hear when people watch their videos is, wow, I had no idea I was doing whatever that thing might be. So it's very, very helpful. Be brave. Take a look at yourself from the outside. And of course, it's helpful to get feedback from a coach, but don't underestimate the power of doing it on your own. Set up a video camera in your office or in your living room and just get a look at yourself and see what might be coming across. And the third reason people don't take on these skills is that you just severely overestimate how much time it takes to take them on. As I mentioned, with the hardest behavior we're dealing with today, eliminating the fillers, 3 minutes a day for 20 days would solve the problem. In my online course, it's a 6-week course, and I only require 10 minutes a day of practice to master all of the skills we've been talking about. So people severely overestimate how much time it will take. But I will say this, the reason it only takes 10 minutes of practice a day is that your brain won't be able to stop thinking about it for the rest of the day. So you only have to commit to the 10 minutes, and then the rest will take care of itself. All right, I'll take any questions you might have. If there's something pressing on your mind, you've been dying to ask a particular question, yeah.
So I'm wondering if you've thought of any of these skills through the filter of that being a part of your day. This also applies to teleconferencing. Okay, so first of all, if you find video conferencing weird, it's because it's weird. In that it's amazing how finely attuned we are to the subtle signals we read in other people, and also timing, that if you ask somebody a question, if a split extra second goes by before they answer, we wonder, was there something wrong? Are you feeling weird about that? So we're very, very attuned to timing and physical signals, and that's really messed up on the video conferencing. And so you first of all just have to have room for that. And then verbally be as explicit as you can when you're talking to people on the other side. So often it will happen in meetings that I have that heads will nod around the table, but the people on the other side are not necessarily noting the head nods. So try to be as explicit about what you might be seeing in the room if you're the facilitator. Oh, it looks like everybody here agrees with that, or we have something along that line. And just leave extra room. Also, one of the things I find funniest about video conferencing is watching people who are not speaking. So because you're basically on camera. And so you might have to be a little more attentive to the fact that you are being watched.
even if you're not the one talking, and recognize that you still need to project a confident image, even in listening mode. We haven't had a chance to talk about listening skills, but they are vital as well. So in this short conversation, it's hard for me to go deep in that, but I would say just recognize it is strange and verbally try to hold up your end of the nonverbals that would be going on in the communication. Any other questions? Yes.
So when it comes to speaking, how does it work for the non-native English speakers, non-native speakers, and accent, voice, lots of differences are there?
Yeah.
So do you have any?
Absolutely, I've got something to say about that. So what's interesting about accents, so first of all, we all have accents, we just have different ones. And our brains are wired for novelty. So if you have an accent that's different than the people you are speaking to, you're already going to have more of their attention. So an accent can be a huge advantage. Also, let me say this, do you like listening to accents, people who have an accent different than your own? Almost everyone says yes. We like listening to accents, so we don't want to get rid of them. Almost always when someone has an accent problem, that's not really what's going on. It's usually some other element. They have an articulation problem. So our brains, when we hear an accent that's different than our own, immediately recognize the substitutions because there are rules that you're following. It's not just willy-nilly. You are substituting a certain vowel or a consonant. Our brains will catch on and then be able to make those substitutions unless we can't hear them. So sometimes it's articulation. The person, maybe because they're shy that they have an accent, will kind of slide by the consonants so they don't make mistakes or they're not blasting the difference in their accent out there. Same thing with volume. People who are speaking in an accent or a language that's not their second language will often pull back in volume because they don't want to make loud mistakes. They'd rather make soft mistakes, which means that the other people can't hear you very well, and that's the communication problem. And then amazingly, sometimes it's pace. I can't tell you how often it happens when someone is speaking English to me as their second language that they talk too fast for me. And I don't know if this is overcompensation for maybe wanting to show that fluidity with language, but often pace is the issue. It's hard for me to keep up. So I would say rather than changing your accent could be a positive for you, but do make sure that your volume, your articulation, and your pacing is clear and appropriate at optimal. That's how you handle an accent problem. Not nearly a problem. Great. If there's another pressing question out there, yes?
What's the appropriate posture when you're on stage presenting but not necessarily speaking?
This happens to me all the time. So you're in waiting mode. And so first of all, there's a difference between listening posture and speaking posture. So everything I've been doing, I've been demonstrating speaking posture. But when you're listening, it's like the difference between being the pitcher and being the catcher. And so if you're sitting and listening, actually rounding out a little bit, looks like you're absorbing the message better. If I sat stock still and listened to you, you might not think I was being very attentive. So the same thing is true up here. If you asked me a question and I stood here like this and listened to you, well, that might not seem very receptive. So I have a tendency to go into listening mode where I round out just a little bit. If you were to talk for a long period of time, I might even take my weight to my side. But I will say this, my spine is always straight. So you still want to have the core strength through here. And it's nice to find a listening posture for yourself, can look different on you than on me, that you feel comfortable in, and then use it as your go-to position if you ever become uncomfortable. I was giving a talk at the Bar Association, so just about 200 lawyers in the room, and one man took issue with what I was saying, and all of a sudden began to do this while I was talking. So when I asked for questions, his hand popped up, great. So I asked him questions. He stood up, and then he went on for a couple of minutes railing on me for something. He had misunderstood something I said. Well, we did clear it up. But so I had to follow my own guidelines there, and I had to continually give myself instructions to look comfortable. So I had to do things like, okay, try to stay still, round out, take a couple of steps, stand still, nod. So I was trying to give myself to look perfectly comfortable, even though inside my brain was going, ah. Yeah. So you find something that looks comfortable on your body. This is really comfortable for me. So if I'm just waiting, if somebody else is talking on stage, I usually would stand like this, or I might possibly take my weight over to one side while I'm waiting. And of course, you have to be attentive to your partners on stage. You can't zone out because you have to use active listening skills. Good to cheat out to the audience so that you look like you're including them in the conversation. And so did that answer your question? All right, good. Looks like we have, yes, one other one.
So my question is that if you suddenly lose your train of thought, then how do you compensate that and still being seen as you're confident?
Yeah, so first of all, it's important to note that thinking on your feet, so I put that as a category, thinking on your feet is a skill. And most people hate feeling flustered and uncomfortable so much that we avoid it anytime we can, which means you only have to go through that when it really matters. So I encourage you to play games where you have to be in that thinking on your feet mode, where you have to come up with answers really quickly. If you want to know, I came up with a box set of impromptus just for this purpose, so I can give them to my clients, so you can always have some sort of fresh question you have to take off the top of your head. So thinking on your feet is a skill. And one of the problems that happens when we're thinking on our feet is there's a lot of self-criticism if we go blank. So you go blank, and then all of a sudden your brain starts to say things like, oh my gosh, now I've lost my train of thought. Oh, everybody's waiting for me. Oh gosh darn this. Oh, I wish I wasn't in this mode. You've got that screaming going on in your head. It is really hard to think when that's happening in your head. So one of the things you learn in the thinking on your feet exercises is just to put that conversation aside. Go find the information that you need. But when you're panicking about the fact that you've gone blank, your head is busy talking about that rather than finding the content. So that's the first thing I would suggest. Get good at that particular skill. And then note that you have so much more time than you think. Your listener will wait if you find the information. I suggest that you not apologize for yourself. So that's really important. If you have lost your train of thought, try not to say, oh, gosh, I was gone. Beat yourself up in front of your audience. You could simply say something like, that thought was just there a second ago and now it's gone. Give me a second. All right, well, so it's okay to take some time. Or you can say, I lost that train of thought. I'm sure it'll come back to me. Let me move forward. But you say it with confidence so that it doesn't look like you are yelling at yourself. So you aren't, in fact, yelling at yourself inside your head. There is one of the derailers I didn't bring up is what we call self-commenting. And it is a pretty prevalent derailer. And so self-commenting is when you comment on or apologize for some perceived mistake that you make. And so I'm going to make a mistake on purpose so you can hear me apologize for it. Let's just say that I'm talking along and I mispronounce something and make a big show out of it. Like I just did. I tripped over that word. I laughed at myself. I said I was sorry. I did a little cute dance, and then I moved forward. So that pointed fingers at the mistake. That was a pretty obvious self-comment. Here's a much more subtle self-comment. Let's just say that I'm talking along, and I mispronounce something, and then keep going. So just a little flinch or scold of myself before I move forward. We make those kinds of errors where we mispronounce something and correct it, or use incorrect grammar and fix it. We do this so often. The metric on this is that it happens once or twice per paragraph in everyday communication. We trip over a word, fix it, and move on. I have done it numerous times up here. Have you noticed? Typically, we just correct and move on. It's seamless. It is a seamless subroutine. Here's how it would sound. Let's just say that I'm talking along, and I mispronounce something and then keep going. No reaction whatsoever. But when we are feeling self-conscious, we notice every mistake that we make. We react. That's what chips away at your credibility. So you do have to correct a mistake if you make one. You just shouldn't apologize for it in any way. Correct and move on. Never let them see your internal conversation about how you are doing. All right, I'm going to wrap up this conversation with just a 1-minute story. There's a true story happened in my life. When my kids were little, I played with them in the morning and then took them off to preschool. And that particular day, as I ran my errands and I went to the bank and to the grocery store and to the dry cleaner, everywhere I went, people greeted me with these big, beaming smiles. It's like the whole entire world was in a fantastic mood, like fairy dust had sprinkled on the earth, and they were in a fantastic mood out there. And then I got home, and I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror, and I had forgotten that when I was playing with the kids, I had drawn a kitty nose and whiskers on my face. So all day long, everywhere I went, I had this kitty nose and whiskers. Now, nobody had mentioned it. Nobody. Now, why do you think they didn't mention it?
They assumed you intended to.
Exactly. They assumed I knew. So obvious a signal could not have been accidental on my part. So this leads us to a very important lesson about today's conversation, and that is you cannot assume you're going to get outside feedback. You have to seek out outside feedback on your skills because people assume you know. And if you don't know, they don't necessarily want to be the one to tell you if you are blind to it. But I encourage you to get an outside look at yourself, and especially on video camera, so you can see what you might need to fix. The reason people make such amazing progress in such a short period of time is that this is not about ability. It's about awareness. That when you know you need to change a behavior, it's actually fairly easy to change the behavior. It's the awareness that is the component that you need to work on. So I encourage you, by all means, when you leave here today, try to get some outside feedback. You can ask others, but your best bet is video camera, even if it's your own iPhone. All right, thank you for being here, everybody. I enjoyed my time.